Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Nick Land, who is one of the original thinkers within the neo-reactionary sphere back in the early aughts and 2010s. And in this conversation, we talk about what is going on the right wing. If you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know I have been venturing into different thinkers and thought patterns within the right, and early on discovered that there's not just one monolithic right wing, but rather several different factions who aren't necessarily all on the same side unless it comes down to their enemy on the so-called left. And in this conversation, Nick Land gives me an eagle eye and yet microscopic view of these different factions. Very fascinating stuff, and actually kind of a culmination of my work investigating what's happening on the not left side of the aisle and what is trying to form there and why it keeps on being interrupted by internecine internal conflict. You can find links to Nick's work down there in the description. He is a poster over on X, and I highly recommend that you follow him there, as well as read his seminal essay, Dark Enlightenment, which I will also link below. Without further ado, here is Nick Land. Hello.
Hi.
Good morning. Good evening.
I have to immediately apologize for the time. I was not really paying attention. Like, it's 6 a.m. for you, is that right?
Yeah, but it's 10 p.m. for you, so...
Okay, but I think
feels kind of fair.
As we go along, it will get less harsh for you and harsher for me, I guess. But anyway, I really appreciate your sacrifice. So.
Oh, no, it's the pleasure's all mine, as well as the pain. What have you been working on lately, or pondering?
Here, let me... Well, I sort of feel the aspect of it relevant to our conversation will kind of arise during the conversation, because a lot of what I've been doing has been delving, to use the AI rhetoric, into the Anglo-Protestant Whig tradition.
Okay.
Which I think is going to be, I hope, a theme. I have actually a couple of preliminary things. If I can just be a little bit controlling just for a minute about our conversation, which is, first of all, well, I guess I'll turn the order around. First of all, I'll say that I'm hoping we can kind of orbit around a notion that is a sort of near-reactionary conversation from the sort of early in the second decade of this millennium, that was thematized originally by a blog post by Spandrel under the name the trichotomy, the neo-reactionary trichotomy, which is at that stage describing factions within this particular group of dissident rightists. And I'll use my, rather than Spandrel's, labels for these, but the Spandrel is the person who kicked this whole discussion off, which is that there were three basic factions it's in communication in the sort of neo-reactionary blog swirl that were techno-commercialists, ethno-nationalists.
Okay, this is the three, okay.
And what we call theonomists, people from a sort of with a basically religious orientation. And I thought that this would be a really good anchoring conception for a conversation, because I think retrospectively was a template for the MAGA coalition. And it divides into these three topics of conversation to do with the kind of the religious current, which I guess is maybe typified most by what calls itself Christian nationalism. The techno-commercial current, which is epitomized so strongly by Elon Musk that any other characterization falls short of that, really. And then obviously the ethnat people, who were obviously the edgiest group at the time, but is obviously representing a current that is extremely crucial, I think, for us now. And so I think all three of those currents are really worth digging into a little bit. And at the most trivial and topical, the recent spats that have been kicking off, everyone's saying, oh, MAGA's dying or whatever. It's a lot to do with factional fighting between groups that can be broadly identified with these different tendencies.
Yeah.
So that's my sort of agenda wish list. But there's one other thing I'd like to do, which is preemptively respond to a criticism that I know you're too polite to make, but many others do, which is they say, you're not even American. Why are you inserting yourself into our political conversation? Because I'm sort of hoping we mostly talk about America. I think the audience for this will be mostly American. And so while there's a parallel conversation about the UK, I think that would be of less interest to people and probably should be touched on tangentially, if at all.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, I think the main justification for this, again, is something I'm confident will emerge in our conversation. But as a sort of anecdotal response to it, I'd just like to say that in recent history, in my basic sentient lifetime, or at least as an adult starting in the 1980s, there has been an Anglosphere ideological resonance, a harmonic across the Anglosphere, and especially a transatlantic harmonic of extreme, almost astonishing strength. And never stronger than in this initial phase where you have Reagan and Thatcher simultaneously, almost exactly coincidentally, initiating the right-wing version of neoliberalism. And both together then switched over to the left-wing version of neoliberalism. Again, very
Clinton and Blair, or
with
Bush
Blair and Clinton, obviously. And I see this, maybe in some ways it's become foggier very recently over the last decade, but right now it seems to me, again, very strong. So even though MAGA is in power in the United States and it's nothing like it is in power in the UK, ideological tendencies extremely attuned to MAGA are the rising trend in the UK too. And so I think selfishly, by talking about MAGA and talking about American politics, I am talking about UK politics. I don't feel that I am passing over into some alien terrain that that should not legitimately concern me.
Mm-hmm. There's an irony that there's these no king protests by the boomers against Trump, I think. I don't know what they're actually protesting, but it seems more likely that a strongman, singular leader can come to power in America not really, but it seems like that could be seen to be the case, than ever could be the case in Britain. Even though Britain is much closer to having a king than us, it's much more swamped in oligarchical, bureaucratic organization. Do you think that that is the case? And do you think that a strong central leader is what is going to be needed to save the UK from mass immigration and the loss of its identity into just this globalist soup with a very posh accent?
Well, I think that's an extremely interesting question. That on the surface constitutional level, the British Prime Minister, I think, enjoys more unfettered power than the American president. The monarchy is obviously completely irrelevant as far as practical power is concerned. And our House of Lords has been completely castrated. I don't think, compared to the Senate, it's really nothing. Mm. And obviously, the Prime Minister in the UK rules directly from Parliament. So you don't have a kind of House of Representatives that can counterpose itself to the cabinet and the Prime Minister's political direction in the same way. But in both, I think, in both countries, it's the real obstacle is the swamp. You know, it's the permanent bureaucracy, it's the judiciary, it's. I mean, I realize your judiciary is largely elected, but at the same time, it is able to operate, I think, very similarly to the judiciary in the United Kingdom as this sort of supposedly apolitical, but in fact deeply left-aligned obstructionist institution. And frankly, I think in the UK the discussion has probably more advanced than in the US about solutions to that. Like, I've seen the people around the Reform Party, which would be, I think, the only realistic MAGA-esque UK political party, its prospects looking very good right now, actually has explicit plans for overcoming judicial, both anticipating and overcoming judicial obstruction. So how that would work out, I don't know, but I think the one advantage of being delayed, because obviously we might not have a general election in the UK till 2029, so you have a big lead on us. Mm-hmm. But it means that there's more preparation time, and it's possible for the people in the UK to learn from the travails of the Trump administration, I think.
Yeah. Do you think that I mean, I speak with a lot of right-coded or right-leaning British young men, more or less, and just it seems pretty damn dire for them, just thinking about the future, and it's especially this immigration problem and this lack of being able to express their own identity. You brought up when we first started this Anglo tradition, probably of thought, philosophy. Was it inevitable that it would geld itself in this way, that it would become so globalist that it no longer respected or cared for its roots, ethnic roots, historical roots?
Again, I mean, I'm overwhelmed by the parallels on both sides of the Atlantic, like this, in the sense that if I can just take a slight step back from this, because I think that the point is that this is where we're in a way the kind of the ethnat segment of, if we were going to do it in some order, I don't know what you think would be best, but we're kind of in the ethnat segment of that trichotomy. And what has happened, I think, and what has led to MAGA happening, and what is shaping the political landscape on both sides of the Atlantic, is that these three trends obviously have all kinds of difficulties working together. And even though it was a very cordial conversation within the NRX space, that was a lot to do with being out of power. And as far as everyone involved was concerned, then perhaps out of power indefinitely until total social collapse. There was not much optimism about the possibility of the system.
Yeah, you have to remember this was the Obama era, and the I guess the liberalism had reached its apotheosis, its closest concrescence to total power.
Yeah,
social power.
Yes, definitely. Woke was on the rise. There seemed nothing that was. The reason that NRX happened is that there didn't seem anyone actually willing to really take the fight to the enemy. You know, the disappointment with what had happened under the sort of Bush administrations was just so profound. Similar, obviously, the utter despair in the UK about what the conservative 14 years of conservative government that we just had, and has been so absolutely useless, not even at like reversing the trends, but even like reducing the speed of the disastrous trends that have been happening. Yes, that our sort of despair is much more recent in that respect, I think. But I think that what has been discovered, you know, and what was discovered by NRX and what has now been discovered by MAGA, is that the enemies of those three trends have all deeply weaponized their positions against the right in general. And they've made themselves a common enemy. Like, you know, in a very, very cursory fashion on this, it's that for the ethnat side, American demography, and the same is true for the UK, has been politically weaponized so explicitly, overtly, and extremely that it's not that it's just like, you know, you have this particular ethnic tradition that we don't respect. It's rather that you do everything in our power to mobilize opposition to your previously hegemonic ethnic tradition as a political weapon. And we will restructure the demography of the society in such a way as to give us a massive political advantage. That looks, you know, inexorable very recently, I think. And then, but I think parallels happen on the other side. It's the same with, you know, rather than secularism just being a loosening and relaxation of the traditional religious culture, it's instead become a counter-religion, an extremely hostile counter-religion under the banner of woke. So it's not just that you know, even if you have no interest, positive interest in the religious tradition of the United States, you have to be interested in the fact that what has opposed it, its enemy, has been an enemy of any possibility of right-wing government at all.
And morality. I think it's most explicitly the leftward attack or weaponization of secularism is through the denigration of any sort of Christian morality, not necessarily the theology. I mean, they've inverted the theology a lot, and people talk about how woke is the new religion and puritanical in a sense, but it's really explicit in its moral. It's anti-family, it's anti-natalist, it's anti-authoritarian, it's anti-hierarchy. deeply, and I think that's most explicitly.
Yes,
Sure.
but all of those things are attached with particular populations. And I don't. When in the religious space now, so I don't mean predominantly racial populations or ethnic
Yeah.
populations. I mean religious populations. That it's created a religious movement with a population
Mm.
that it can direct towards. It's an attack upon the traditional order of society.
Yeah.
So all these groups, for instance, within the LGBTQ population, it's not like the new atheists position where they think, okay, you stop believing in God, you drop your sort of religious attachments, and we'll all be liberal secularists in this together. That's not what happened at all. It's rather that you get a counter religion, which is a massive part of the leftist coalition that will wage holy war
Yeah.
against your society.
Yeah.
And the final thing is then obviously with the tech com side, with the capitalist types, is that again, it's the big government, the resources amassed by the government, the big government growth and cancerization and all the things that classical liberalism has attacked in terms of welfareism and all of this. It's not just that money, those resources, are going towards some neutral policy which you might not agree with on strictly capitalist grounds towards economic redistribution and welfare and all of that. They've been used to fund, again, these leftist movements. This is the great Doge discovery.
Yeah.
It's not that they're just cutting waste. They're cutting enemy resources.
Yeah.
Resources that have been funneled into bureaucratic organizations, NGOs, but political activists. They funded leftist political activism. So everyone, all the three parts of that unstable MAGA coalition have to realize that however complicated their relationship with their fellows are, those fellows have an enemy that is their enemy.
And their common enemy is of a magnitude of order greater than their, their disagreements.
I would definitely say so. Because all of those three things, the engineered new demography, the engineered new woke religious movement, and the engineered counter economy are all deeply coordinated. So it's not as if you can just say, oh, well, that's not our problem. That's the problem just of the religious types, or that's the problem just of the ethnic people, or that's just the problem of the capitalists. It's your problem unless you're part of that leftist blob, because those things are on the left side all knit together with perfect seamless coherence.
Do you think it's a hallucination or an illusion? You use the word coordinated. I think that is the proper term. Is it directed intentionally, or is it a harmonic, emergent property that all these things come together into this blob? Is it intended, or is it like a cancer? It's just like something in liberalism mutated, or something in the Anglosphere mutated, and then produced this thing, or is it inevitable? It's just the way that societies always go. Or
it seems
some
to me
demonic
sensed very, very intensely and coherently, and I think that the left understands it too. Obviously, is a coalition. It too has room for internal fissures, and it talks about that, and it thinks about that,
Yeah.
and it explicitly strategizes about that and understands that they have a common project because they have a common enemy. Much more than the right has recently been able to do. But I think MAGA is the avatar of some kind of coherent counter strategy on the right. The first one we've seen since probably the 1980s.
But if the left had already basically won back in the early days of the NRX neo-reactionary movement, what was the common enemy? Can you describe from the left point of view what this common enemy is? And maybe that would enrich our understanding of what this rightward coalition actually is perceived of as.
I think it's something like white Christian capitalistic patriarchy. It's something that makes a coherent enemy of all of those different elements of the trichotomy.
Yeah. Why that though? Of all the properties in the world, why go after that? I mean, if you put those things together, it has a historical relevance because it's done a lot of shit, evil and good. It created the modern world. Yes. Patriarchal, Christian, Protestant, European.
So why do they hate it, you're saying?
Yeah, why would you hate what gave you the bounty of the world, that one Eden for you, let's say?
I mean, this is probably a question we could dig in on lots of levels of depth. Actually, I mean, it seems to me so transparent that this thing, as they're concerned, is neatly coherent as an enemy, that it takes a certain intellectual effort to sort of imagine how it could not be for them, but yes, why did all throughout the Anglosphere this same hostile coalition coalesce? I mean, I know you asked sort of similar question to your previous guests, and they maybe refer back to Yarvin's pronomian antinomian distinction, which is what I think Oren McIntyre did most recently. I think right. It's like the story about the bank robber asked about why do you rob banks, and they said because that's where the money is. It's like if you're basically wanting to loot the society that you have, you look and see what you think is the kind of central establishment of that. I mean, originally, obviously, on the left, it's a long, complicated story, but when it was just much more class-based and much more Marxist in orientation, that was extremely clear. It's just like, if you said, why are you anti-capitalist? It would be like, because they own everything. Like, who else are you going to steal shit from? And gradually, I think it's emerged for them that capitalism is entrenched in a particular mode of society, and the foundations of that society are the natural allies of the capitalist system, and the evolution through, like I guess it sounds a bit cringe to put it like this, but I think it isn't inaccurate through these kind of neo-Marxist Frankfurtian type ideas, was that you turn it into a cultural revolution because you do you fail in just doing a frontal assault as a class-based attack on the capitalist system, and you then say, well, okay, we have to broaden our front.
Yeah. Well, it's not just a failure on the capitalist communist side, but it is, why not loot moral authority, aesthetic authority? Why not loot all these different things? Why focus just on money and class? Why not go after respect, positions of power? Why not engineer the total takeover?
Yes.
And so the response, the fascinating thing about the recent infighting, I think this is where the conversation about Israel comes in, because Israel excites and demonstrates a lot of the difficulty of the ethnic aspect of the pushback against cultural Marxism or the blob, and like how do you actually navigate that, and that excites, on the right, it excites a lot of ethnic hostility between Europeans and Jews. Right. And then not to mention the left with its colonial settler dynamic. So how does, and I just reread or re-listened to your Dark Enlightenment essay, just so brilliant. It's such an enjoyable piece of work. And you spend a lot of time around the ethnic question. And like that's the thing that will always trip up the right or any sort of coalition. Trump just doesn't even, I don't think he even touches it. It's a sign to him, but he never really touches that third rail. So I'm wondering how do it's kind of cringe to be racist. I think that's the limiting principle of race. It's not evil, it's just cringe. It's just polite society, especially Anglo polite society, is just never going to really stomach white supremacist overtones in its echelons. So how does one navigate that the ethnic solidarity without exciting that bigotry trigger word that just, it even destroys the right from, well, the center right from within?
Yes. I mean, I think that you can decompose this question a little bit, because I think there is the whole Groyper anti-Semitism issue, which has a certain distinct quality to it, and probably can't be easily bundled in as if it's just, a straightforward part of this picture, I think.
Yeah.
But then the wider question, I think it maybe is the most crucial question, and it's inherently extremely paradoxical and quite fascinating, actually. Like, because neoreaction was distinguished from the alt-right, which was more just a straightforward kind of race politics, and obviously also tended to have a strong anti-Semitic element as part of that.
Yeah, it was kind of lowbrow too, or lower brow.
Yes, I mean, I think that neoreaction was quite contemptuous of it, but probably actually excessively so, in the sense that I think there's conversations that could have been had that weren't. But anyway, yeah, I think that's something definitely to come back to. But the big sort of anarchist influence was obviously the whole human biodiversity movement. So, and the findings of human biodiversity, I mean, there's several aspects to it. But I think there's two that are particularly outstanding. And one of them is just the like you had Bo Weingart on your show, and so there's just simply that, or what he was calling race realism. That's just or as he says, also saying that he should try and save this some scientific racism,
which distills down to quantifiable. Well, the trigger on that topic is the IQ.
Yes, for sure. And so that's, you know, I get the grandfather of that in some ways in terms of the more popular cultures, obviously Charles Murray. Big books is like Richard Lynn's IQ and the Wealth of Nations, that I think was a very influential text on this. And so on one side, obviously the HBD thing is just like, look, you know, this stuff is just true. You know, it's uncomfortable. You know, people don't like talking about it. It's deeply taboo, and it was obviously the core taboo of the whole woke epoch. I mean, woke really, in a way, everything else was kind of a sideshow, as opposed to this climaxing on this just fundamental attempt to prevent that discussion happening. And it's obviously still the case that despite the overwhelming empirical solidity of that HBD material in this facet, it's only able to crawl into the edge of the Overton window, even I think at this stage, and it's like it's not part of polite political conversation. But things I think have moved forward a lot.
And your early work and Yarvin's work explore why that is the case, why this question is so taboo, because it underpins the entire the foundational assumptions of the liberal modernist worldview, that human beings are created equal and everything that follows from that. I'm just highlighting that as a note.
Yes, I mean, I think that it's a particular reading of that, you know, created equal, in the sense that there's a danger, I think, of throwing the baby out with the bathwater here, in the sense that there's a certain notion of liberalism has a relation to equality that is complicated, and part of it, I think, is very important and positive, which is, and the division is normally done in terms of formal and substantial equality. So substantial equality is on the economic front, it's obviously massive redistribution and kind of socialistic economics and everything associated with that. Egalitarianism as economic policy. But in the area we're looking at particularly now, substantial equality is universalistic, blank slate humanism. And universalistic blank slate humanism, I strongly contend, is unsustainable as an empirical claim. I mean, it's simply false. Like, however much you might want it to be true, it's simply false. That human populations have significant diversity in their average traits in all kinds of ways. I mean, obviously the hot button one is to do with IQ, which are obviously interesting. I mean, it's not like white people kind of come out, it's not white supremacist discovery that comes out of this at all, where white people are in the middle of a kind of average racial IQ distribution, in fact. And if people want to be more pro-white than comes out of that, then they have to introduce other traits that they see as being favorable as well.
Just to interject, I don't think it's not just the case that universalist blank slatism is unsustainable theoretically or empirically, but it's unsustainable financially. The amount of infrastructure that the government requires in order to bear out this equality of outcomes, they call it. But it's also equality. The Liberal Project also includes equality of opportunity, like the amount of infrastructure to get opportunity and outcomes. It's just unsustainable. The amount of money printing, and I think that's why it fits so well into this blob or this bureaucratic structure, because it facilitates the depletion of wealth, or the creation of jobs that don't produce anything. The whole complex.
No, it requires infinite government. It requires infinite government because it's it's simply not the case. I mean, as everyone sort of says, like, no one is saying that the NBA should be kind of representative of the racial mix of American society, for good reasons. And if you wanted to, if that was your big hobby horse, let's just say that you just really were like a typical kind of guerrilla American sports fan, but obviously with a particular kind of egalitarian, blank slate liberal racial obsession. And you said, look, we should be really focusing on curing the social ills that lead to this ridiculously disproportionate distribution of racial groups in the NBA. That is a sign of social sickness. It's like, why are there not hardly any Chinese basketball players? Like whatever 5% of Americans are East Asian or whatever the number is, and it's like they basically are no Chinese basketball players. This is a grave social ill, and we have to cure it. And, there's things that they would perhaps try and do to cure it, but it's going to basically require infinite government to do it.
Yeah. And even on the corporate level, the amount of money that is invested, wrong word, into DEI, just to cook the books in a way, it takes a lot of extra resources. So corporations can't do it on their own. They'll need to have kickbacks from someplace.
No, and it breeds a whole new class. And the class of the DEI apparatchik class, whose political alignment is completely straightforward. I mean, I don't think anyone in those positions, whether in the corporate world, in the federal bureaucracy, and anywhere in social life, is voting Republican. It's just like they're an absolutely secure vote bank for the sort of rolling revolution from the left. And so it's a double whammy for them. The more, even if those people cannot achieve anything which is close to the truth, I mean,
they can achieve Zoom meetings.
Yeah, they can definitely achieve getting a job, extracting resources, and voting Democrat. Irrespective of anything they actually do for the supposed first order problem that is justifying their position.
And if you eradicated those positions, the left seems to have it baked in that if you eradicate those positions, you're just going to have more people on the streets agitating violently to be repossessed of what they were dispossessed of. So if Trump went and just cut SNAP, I think he was going to do that, the benefit programs. At this point, the right can't solve that problem without providing off-ramps from the government, from the teat, so to speak. So it would have to think racially in a beneficial way if it wants to think racially at all. It would have to think, well, insofar as we have certain populations that perform only so well, we need to take care of those populations because they're going to be a thorn in our side otherwise, or they'll just keep voting Democrat. I think Trump has been really good if you look at his metrics on how many minorities, so-called, have been voting for him over the course of time, because he's proposing some.
Look, I think there's two different, both interesting issues tangled up in that. One is we're talking about the actual, like the racial groups that are impacted by this in whatever direction. And on the other hand, we're talking about the DEI bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And they're very different populations. They're very different populations. And they both raise interesting issues. But there's no, for instance, I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting question. What is, if you have a reflexive analysis of DEI on the DEI bureaucracy, is the DEI bureaucracy actually predominantly represented by supposedly disadvantaged minorities?
I remember back in 2020 looking at all of the D in colleges, I can't remember what they call the diversity vice presidents. They're all black, probably 70% women. Okay. I think that would be representative in
so there's a strong overlap of these two things for sure.
Yeah, at least at college, but college is much more aware of optics.
Yes,
you have to look the part to play the part.
I mean, Thomas Sowell, I've seen come up before in your conversations on this, and obviously, you know, as it's always said, I mean, in the trichotomy thing, he's an absolute sweetheart as far as the tech com people are concerned.
A neoreactionary darling, if I was right.
But he's a nobody for the ethnats, and I probably like just moderately popular for the sort of Theonomists. But you know, I think he's got a lot of writings about sort of ethnic economies. And a lot of it, even if you're very skeptical about his like HBD denial, that he still has a lot of interesting things to say. And one of them is the fact that, you know, we know that racial differences in traits and talents are not monotonic in terms of people's economic opportunities. Like there's lots of things that, for instance, we are coming back to like African people of African descent, because they're obviously the most hot button side of that, other than the Jews, which we'll do as a separate conversation. So you know, there's lots of things that African Americans have exceptional talents for. I mean, you know, we've just said, like, it's not as if sports is like a nothing burger in American life. The music, entertainment generally, stand-up comedy, acting. I mean, you know, I think the acting thing, even it would survive a kind of a dialing down of the kind of, you know, race mix politics where, like, you know, Queen Elizabeth is black or whatever, like. So, you know, and I'm sure there's lots more subtle ones like that. It's like, so I'm not persuaded that it's if you don't follow the DEI agenda, these people are just being thrown on the scrap heap.
Yeah. Well, a significant portion of the black middle class does derive its wealth from these programs, or are given carves out via these things. So what do they do? I think small business in a different economy, but I don't see how small businesses work in this economy.
I mean, frankly, you know, if you were just paying them the same amount to stay at home, it would do less damage than paying them whatever they're being paid to do DEI activism. So, I mean, there's lots of room for, you know, quite extremely compassionate kind of social solutions that would still involve dismantling the current solution. The current solution is so toxic because it, again, is this double whammy phenomenon. It's not just that it's this, you know, social resources being invested in these people, but it's being invested in these people to do something massively damaging and to basically engage in, you know, a directional ideological warfare against the existing establishment of American life, if it even can be said to be still.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time on the ethnic component. We haven't touched on the theonomist.
Yeah, but
component.
Sorry, before we switch, can I just say one more thing about this?
Yeah, no, I don't mean to rush.
Which is just to say,
curious.
Because I was trying to say there's two sides to the HBD thing, and this is one of them. Okay, which is obviously there's a big discussion about this. You've talked to a lot of people about this or whatever. The other side of it, though, I think is also really important, which is that one of the traits that clearly is massively divergent between populations is ethnocentrism. And white people, but not really white people in general so much as specifically Northwest Europeans, and particularly Anglos, are uniquely low in ethnocentrism.
They're allergic to it.
Yes, and this is a biological trait.
Is it biological?
I think
it predates.
It's substantially biological. Huh. It's substantially biological. The person who did lots of really interesting stuff on this that stood out for me, like going back to the early neoreactionary times, is this blogger called HBD Chick, who had a whole thing about the really complicated cultural genetic loops involved in the criminalization of cousin marriage and outbreeding among, so there's the Hagenal line cuts Europe in half. There's half of it that was strictly opposed to cousin marriage and therefore imposed outbreeding. And that side of the Hagenal line becomes liberal, high trust, has high ethnic openness, and is heading on this vector towards basically effectively zero ethnocentrism. And so,
is that suicidal in a way or not?
Well,
it seems like it's really good to expand, but then when it contracts, you're screwed.
Well, at the time when you're outbreeding and, engaging in these high trust interactions with strangers with low ethnocentrism, you're dealing with your neighbors who are also basically Northwest Europeans. And so there's no obviously suicidal consequences crop up at that point. But when you're projected into this universalized, globalized world,
which you founded because of your capacity to reach across those barriers.
Yes, the paradox deepens.
Yeah.
Then it does become, people say, pathological altruism. It's like you're basically systematically destroying the ethnicity that is at the basis of ethnic tolerance.
It's that meme where the clusters of care is outsourced or distributed away from you.
That's
biological.
There's for sure a biological component to it.
Could you explain if you recall why was it cousin marriage? What sparked that? Was that a theological?
Yes, it was. It was originally the church
or a property thing,
and cousin marriage in Western Europe.
Was it to distribute property in some way, or was there a disgust reflex, you think?
Now it's interesting what the motive originally of the church was in doing that. And honestly, I would be stepping beyond my zone of competence in that. So I don't know. But the consequences, obviously, is you get a culture genetics feedback loop that just promotes these traits that are quintessentially Anglo traits and result in this thing, as you say, like, trying to interest the English in ethnocentrism. I mean, this was the, I think, at least one of the basic NRX quibbles with the alt-right was to say, look, you're being so naive that you're supposedly being like racist in favor of people who are the only non-racist people on Earth. So be realistic about what you're dealing with. Like, it's like, if you're going to try and have, like, whatever they would say, racial consciousness, part of that racial consciousness is to understand what the Anglos are like. Mm-hmm. And they just are not going to buy a certain type of race politics. They're actually genetically, they're racially incapable of adopting a certain kind of racial politics.
If you look at the anti-elite in American consciousness for decades, even centuries, it's the inbred Appalachian white. The inbred white is the lowest you could possibly be, and that's a racial reflex. That's a disgust reflex.
Yes, it's complicated. It's also because those Appalachians are Celts, and Celts have this less than Anglos. Like Celts are capable of much more
in group.
In group, the ethnocentrism. And so obviously for the kind of cosmopolitan Anglo, that's coded as low status. And reciprocally, it's like any Anglo who is on the kind of side of their bell curve distribution that is high in ethnocentrism, they will similarly be coded as low status.
I don't think you can. That's not solvable, obviously. But how do you work around that if you're trying to preserve the Anglo race at this point, or get them to preserve themselves, maybe?
Well, it definitely. I'm reluctant and in fact refuse to say it's an entirely intractable problem. I think you can't overestimate the degree of paradox and complexity in this question. But it does seem to me that somehow it is being politically resolved. Like, you've spoken, as you say, to a lot of guys from the UK who are obviously at the point, if you have a politics that is moving towards goals of negative immigration, of having some sense of actually kind of having a non-fungible sense of immigrant populations, and saying, like, actually those guys are fine, but those guys are a problem. This is something that is very, as we've said, this is very against the basic grain of the Anglo mentality, but it's something that I think is clearly happening. And
Israel, but for Britain, kind of thing.
I mean, that would be still a very extreme version of it that I think probably is not. I mean, like, the thing with our Jewish friends is that they don't have the same ethnocentrism deprivation problem that Anglos have. So obviously, insofar as they can actually be, Stephen Millerized and made into allies, they're extremely valuable allies, because they just don't have that same Anglo gag reflex about basically having this kind of ethnic consciousness in their policy process.
So you have to kind of outsource that to other groups.
I would say, like, if I have an off the top of my head sort of answer about, well, how is this possible that this is happening? Like, how is it even imaginable that we've got to this point now where, the Trump administration, whether people are happy or not about the numbers, we, for the first time in America, have negative net migration. In the UK, there's the rising political tendency is very sympathetic to that and is wanting to work out how you could have this in the UK. How is that even possible? I would say the answer to it is to go back to this thing about the trichotomy. It's to say, look, even people who are not in the ethnat current understand that the ethnats have a point because we have a common enemy. We have a common enemy. And even if your issues are totally to do with capitalism and to do with how do you make Elon Musk possible at scale, or if you're wanting to defend and reanimate religious tradition, you have to recognize that the people who are in your way are the same people that the ethnats are saying are in their way. That the ethnat struggle is, in a sense, your struggle, because the enemy is the same. The enemy is consolidated. The same people who are trying to do this massive demographic reconstruction are also the same people who are trying to destroy your religion and destroy your capitalist economy. And so if you care about your capitalist economy and care about your religion and don't, as a good Anglo, care about the demographic structure of your country, you're still forced to see that actually you're dealing with a coherent enemy. And therefore you have to try, and I think this is what is happening, you have to try and sympathize with that ethnat case to the extent that it is recognizing a crucial part of the enemy formation.
The specter of World War II is so foundational to the right conservatives that's the easiest way to break that coalition apart, is to engineer some sort of Nick Fuentes to go in there and just disrupt them and have them all shooting each other in the foot, or their movement in the foot. And being able, if I am in any position to counsel anyone, it's to just calm down and understand where these people are coming from, the ethnats. Just understand where they're coming from, and through that understanding, develop a relationship that can modulate it a little bit. But it's a tar baby. Racism is just a tar baby. It just, if there's one communist at a dinner party, there's one communist at a dinner party. If there's one Nazi at a dinner party, it's a Nazi dinner party kind of thing. But maybe it's just changing culturally. I think it is, because it kind of wore itself out, perhaps.
Yes, I mean, I would say that there's a kind of breakdown here of there's a broad issue about how far you will allow race realism in general to become a kind of empirical factor behind your policy. And then there's the specific question about anti-Semitism. And I think those two things are quite distinct, in the sense that obviously, it's not that they don't intercommunicate, and they intercommunicate in a tangle of interesting ways, obviously, because the fundamental like alt-right, like just straight up race politics position on the Jews is that they are the great enabler of leftist race politics in general. So their position will be to say, look, don't get mad at Haitians coming, or Somalis coming. Who is bringing those Haitians and Somalis into the country? It's the Jews. And so that's the kind of, I'm obviously crudifying it a little bit, perhaps, but I think that's basically what is the kind of, maybe the alt-right doesn't even exist anymore. I'm being just being faded Xer or whatever.
No, but you see that conversation happening a lot in the right-wing spaces, and also the anti-Semitism thing is a non-starter to just the death knell of MAGA. If people who aren't really thinking about the destruction that it's going to do to the coalition just keep on leaning into it, and they can't not. The Ben Shapiro's of the world can't not. The they can't not keep on leaning into it as the greatest evil, the foundational sin of the West. Foundational sin of America was slavery. Foundational sin of the West, from a certain point of view, conservative point of view, is anti-Semitism. They say that explicitly.
Yes. Yes, and I think that they make the case very clumsily and incompetently. Like, so, I mean, what I notice about the difference between what's happening in the UK and what's happening in the USA is that in the UK, I think that the right is managing this much better, actually. Like, because I don't think there's almost any serious attempt to tar the rising MAGA analog forces in the UK as being anti-Semitic. It's but partly because they just are not providing the grounds for it. There's nothing like really the
crude,
Fuentes type, the Groyper type thing happening there, actually. And obviously, from the point of view of these American Groyper types, it's like that's a big problem with what's happening in the UK. They'd say, oh, look, these guys are, they have a certain type of ethno-nationalist thing. They want to sort out immigration. They want to, like, definitely, all illegal immigrants should definitely be removed. And there should be just questions about what's happening to demography and a recognition that a lot of what's happening to UK demography is a leftist weapon. That they will say, they're doing all that, but because they're not like, I'm not going to say woke on the Jews because that would be just too Lindsay, but because they're not, because they don't have that problem with the Jews, then for a lot of the Groyper types, it's like ultimately they're cooked and they're not really, not really dealing with the root of the problem. And frankly, I think that's because, the English Jewish community is much less obnoxious than the most vociferous parts of the American Jewish community. I mean, it's just like they do not provide the same ammunition for that. They don't. When people, are looking for people in Europe, you can find these abundant amount of vociferous leftist,
so much so that it's illegal,
Jewish intellectuals in the USA.
Yeah.
And when you're looking for those in Europe, like there's that Swedish woman who just, like, of course, was just horrific and just saying it's our duty as Jews to basically completely destroy white ethnic identity in all European countries. But they find a woman in Sweden. I don't think there's the same culture among the European Jewish diaspora of making those kind of alignments that fuel anti-Semitic backlash as you get in the United States.
I think there's also a cultural harmony between the British elite and probably the Jewish elite. Just the Britishized Ashkenazi Jews, they're very high performing, probably more to business. I don't really know, but I could just feel that they would have more sympathy for each other as business partners, ethnically.
Yes, I mean, obviously we've had a Jewish prime minister. Extremely interesting Jewish prime minister, Disraeli, who was very explicit. I think he actually has the statement, race is everything.
Really?
So he's a very interesting guy.
Is he like a Steve Miller kind of ish?
Well, this is going back, obviously, to the end of the 19th century. But, I think that you probably could draw that analogy. I think so. It's interesting. And because the Anglo-Jewish relationship is very complicated and interesting and deep, especially the Protestant. This is like in this, Anglo-Protestant Whig tradition. it's a Protestant thing, like Cromwell, the hard Protestant revolution in the UK was very philo-Semitic. You know,
in contrast to Martin Luther, who was rather anti-Semitic.
Yes, Martin Luther was clearly not. I think it was disappointment. But yes, but the Anglo Protestants definitely didn't have that sentiment, and it's kind of interesting why. I mean, there's a whole, we could get into a huge thing about this, and there's probably.
Could you give me a few little tasty morsels?
Yeah, well. Okay, sorry, hang on one second. Let me just gather my thoughts.
And by the way, I'm really enjoying this conversation. So thanks.
Oh well, I'm very pleased. I worried that I might be underprepared, but yeah, I think that you get a lot of insight from this if you go flip straight to the other extreme, which is a person I think is extremely interesting, and I actually learn a lot from, but as far as I'm concerned, is not us, which is E. Michael Jones, who is obviously a very devout Catholic and extremely articulate, extremely intelligent, very interesting guy. And his enemy is my people, you know, like the Anglo-Protestant Whig tradition is exactly what he is against. And he's also notorious for, he's accused of anti-Semitism. Now, I actually agree. He says that's unfair, and I actually, in a way, agree. I think it needs to be nuanced, because he's not at all racialist. This is all to do with religious history. And by the Jews, he means those who rejected Christ. You know, and he constantly says it's got nothing to do with DNA. It's a religious choice. It's a rebellion against the Messiah. But he sees capitalists, Protestants, and Jews as all knitted together in the thing that he is polemicizing against. Like for him, it's all part of the same thing. And I think in that's a great insight. It's true. It's like in the history of like sociology, as far as I'm concerned, it climaxes in Weber writes The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. So, I mean, we can get back into I think that Reformed Christianity and capitalism are absolutely joined at the hip as a historical phenomenon and cultural phenomenon. But then following him, Sombart writes a book about the Jews and capitalism. Also, and people don't read it now. I don't know why. It's extremely interesting. It parallels Weber, and he's not saying at all. He's not trying to overthrow Weber, but he's saying, yes, there's this Protestant capitalistic process, and as a crucial annex to that is the Jews, whose contribution to the development of capitalism is immense, and again massively disproportionate. So, you know, he goes through industry after industry and innovation after innovation, and shows that the Jewish contribution to these new capitalistic modes of organization is massively disproportional.
It's like 50% of the book's just an early life Wikipedia drawl across the industries.
A lot of it is that. A lot of it is that. Yes, it's very interesting.
Does one lead into the? I'm wondering. So, if the Anglo-Protestant capitalists are bred in to some degree to have to be able to expand beyond their ethnicity, their ethnos, and that would facilitate great amounts of trade. But Jews preserve inner group favor, but still through trade interact with totally different. And so they're both in different ways able to capitalize on trade, on mercantilism, on the feedback loop between societies.
Yes. No, I think on that level of capitalistic social organization is the basis of this alliance. So there has been a historical alliance, like E. Michael Jones deeply laments it, whatever other people supported, between Anglos and Jews to do with capitalistic social organization. And why that happens is very interesting. I mean, I think one crucial part of it goes back to our question about formal as opposed to substantial identity. Because the thing about formal identity that is so important is it's a really prophetic notion, in the sense that in our age of the internet or cryptocurrency, that the old libertarian joke was, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. That's to say, you have a crypto identity, you have no established social status. It's the absolute complete departure from the feudal world into the capitalistic world, that you're just a name with an account, and you can build reputation on the basis of that crypto identity that is completely independent of your real world social status. So it's complete formal equality. It's not substantial equality. Like, everyone with a Bitcoin account doesn't end up with the same amount of Bitcoin in it, but everyone with a Bitcoin account can just process Bitcoin in the same way as anyone else. It's just a Bitcoin account, like with a name attached. Well, it's not a name attached to it in that case, but the general principle is that. And of course, the modern Jewish experience in Europe begins with crypsis, because of the fact that the Spanish Inquisition, after the Reconquista, tried to impose religious identity. And so large numbers of the Jewish community became crypto-Jews. That's to say that they would just socially present as Christians while cryptically remaining Jewish. And that cryptic identity is, I think, essentially capitalistic. It's like, you're just engaging in a formal transaction under this identity, and all the capitalistic principles of contractual integrity remain. It's not like you just can, it's about, an opportunity to cheat and lie on that level at all. No one can cheat and lie with a Bitcoin address, but your public social status is a complete irrelevance. It's just bracketed off. And so this is a really, some people hate this. It's for them a reason to hate Jews, Protestants, and capitalists. Like the fact that
because it's inauthentic.
Because
it's inauthentic. It goes back to Peter's denial of Christ 3 times. It really strikes at the heart of the censure against hypocrisy. It's essentially hypocritical.
Well, because the public face is hypocritical, but the private crypto face is beyond hypocrisy, because it's just not a relevant. It's just not a relevant issue. It's like, if the stock exchange is so, from this point of view, retarded and feudal that it actually cares about anything about your substantial social identity to allow you to trade on the stock market, then so much the worse for it as an institution. Anything that you do to root around that is, in those terms, in Protestant, capitalist, Jewish terms, completely legitimate. you're just bypassing something that is just archaic.
Yeah, which is interesting when we go back to DEI and the reintroduction into the market of these substantial identities or these.
Exactly. No, exactly. It's the opposite of DEI, obviously.
Yeah.
Because in this world, in crypto world, which of course is only ever partial in any society. I mean, it's very. There's a whole reading of NRX as an attempt to actually produce a kind of comprehensive crypto society, but it's very much speculative science fiction type of thing. Yeah. So in any easily imaginable concrete society, that whole cryptic side is some small part of the whole social process. But that whole side of the social process is completely immune to DEI initiatives, because no one knows on the internet. No one knows you're a dog. I mean, they just simply don't. They cannot favor you because of your substantial identity, because you don't have a relevant substantial identity. You only have
that substantial identity does produce results, though, in crypto world, because it dictates your morality. Protestants and Jews both put, even though they're maybe in one respect lying, they're still very truthful and honest in another respect. The market works because they're acting in good faith on a market level, even though they might be acting in bad faith on a social level. So that substantial identity, religious identity rather, is the driving engine of capitalism's ability to scale, because it relies on people being honest and following their word, being contractually bound.
I think that is definitely very true and important. But I think also on the other side, there is a teleological trajectory within liberal capitalist social orders towards what becomes explicitly called trustlessness in crypto. So that, for instance, if you're trading Bitcoin, it's just impossible for you to be dishonest. Like the assumption of the whole mechanism is just that. Assume. Let me just go. This to me couples with this other thing. So maybe I'm going too far. So I'll have to zigzag back. But there's this. Obviously notion in Calvinism that's called total depravity. So even though actually Calvinists are extremely high trust societies, their theological assumption is total depravity. That is again to say trustlessness. I heard someone that for me is the representative of the most interesting side of this theonomist current, which I know we can go on to later. But a guy, I don't know whether you know him, Doug Wilson, who's like maybe the best known Christian nationalist, absolutely brilliant and fascinating guy as far as I'm concerned. Really, really interesting. And he said, look, if aliens were looking back at the American Constitution and said, what was the guiding principle behind this document, they would say total depravity. That's to say, the assumption in all the mechanisms of the American constitutional system is that you can't trust anybody. And it's all about, the whole thing about double division of powers and double checking and people. It's all about assuming that this is bad actors. Everyone is a bad actor, and the mechanism is supposed to be a trustless system. It's a kind of proto-crypto regime in that way.
Could you just define trustless? You can still it outsources trust where you don't have to worry about trust, because it's just assume that you don't have to trust. So there is trust, but it's trustless. It's a weird kind of phrase.
Yes, okay. Like in where it reaches its acme, there's two. Like I don't know whether we're talking about the American Constitution or about crypto, but let's start because crypto is where it's purest. And the starting point, there's a notion in computer science or whatever that's called a Sybil attack. And a Sybil attack is where someone can just multiply fake identities, and therefore, if there's any kind of like democratic mechanism, just overwhelm and produce
a DDoS on the voting level, yeah.
And so a satisfactory crypto solution has to be immune against Sybil attacks. And that is what makes it trustless, which is to say, even if someone is just proliferating all these fake identities and boom, 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 and behaving in the most dishonest possible fashion, they can't hack this system. This system is integrally defended against that, and so the proof of work mechanism, most famously in blockchains, means that you just can't get around it by any kind of dishonesty. You just actually have to prove that you're doing the work in order to be taken seriously as an actor on that network. So trustlessness there just means that like it doesn't require any extrinsic moral commitment in order to sort of be robust as a system.
And that's the end goal. Just to go back to why people would be critical of Protestants, Jews, and capitalists, because do they see that as soulless? It's trustless, but it's also soulless, or?
Yes, I would think so, because of the fact that it's not rooted in some notion of substantial moral community. It's basically all about dealing with strangers. And so we're back to a lot of things in saying that. It's like, this is what the outgroup thing is. This is why Anglos are low in ethnocentrism. Yeah. It's like dealing with strangers. How do you do that? So either you can try and bring everyone into some moral global community, or you can be very naively universalist and just attribute randomly and promiscuously attribute high levels of moral community to all strangers, which is what the left does. Or you can build trustless systems. And there is a kind of mainline current of Protestant, Jewish, capitalistic, social engineering that is about innovating trustless systems, which means so that we can continue high intensity engagement with strangers without having to presuppose unrealistic things about the moral community that we're engaged with.
Which leads to this whole problem that certain strains of the neo-reactionary movement have about the deracination effect of liberalism, of capitalism. Like what Ben Shapiro went, whether justly or not justly, viral for, by saying you should never expect to be entitled to grow up in the place you were born in. If you can't afford it, move out. There's no part of our social contract as Americans that guarantee you any sort of home, which is perfectly purely capitalist and innovative in an American way, or allows for massive amounts of innovation, social mobility, but at the same time, it completely liquidates the thicker bonds of community, of family, of place.
Yes, I mean, those things have to articulate. That is definitely for sure true. And I think it's a kind of complicated articulation because, again, I think we cycle into these various types of paradox. And I think the paradox that is really pressing now, and I think is driving a resurgence of Anglosphere ethnopolitics, is the notion that even this trajectory towards the production of trustless systems itself has ethnic foundations. Like it's not that it's just everyone can do this. It's like, you don't see these trustless systems popping up all over the world. They pop up particularly in those notions where the kind of Anglo-cultural matrix is at its most intense.
Mm-hmm.
And
what about China?
Well, exactly. China has actually banned almost all crypto.
You think that's for moral, biological reasons or for control? But they probably all fold in to each other.
Well, when you say moral, biological reasons, I mean, I think, I honestly feel I'm probably second to none in my sort of admiration of the Chinese people. But I deeply recognize that they are very different. I think that the notion that was the dominant sort of guiding force of Clintonian globalization, that the Chinese basically are just begging to become Anglo-liberals, and that if we kind of just have free trade with them, they're going to become Anglo-liberals. I think that's deeply deluded. Mm-hmm. It's like, again, it's on the kind of one side of this whole HBD thing. Liberalism like that is not a strong trait in China.
But capitalism isn't not. I mean, it seems like China as a system, as a government, and as a people have no problem with capitalism, well, right? Or is it different? Is there a different flavor to it?
Yes, this is a very active discussion, actually, and it's a very interesting discussion. I almost don't know where to begin. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people who are these, like, the most interesting type of communists, actually, who say, oh, China actually is communist. They're very insistent. There's some. I think it's the American Communist Party is a weird organization, and it's actually almost MAGA aligned in certain respects. And but one of the things it says is, like, it shows the Shanghai skyline and says, look what communism can do. So that's one side of this discussion of just saying, look, it's just not capitalist at all. Obviously, the other side of it, and I definitely
just because it's prosperous doesn't mean it's capitalist. I think that's the problem when you just use photos.
It's what is meant by capitalism is a kind of really interesting question, and I think there obviously are capitalist dynamics. If you just see capitalism as a machine. And, it's a certain sort of set of functions to do with capital accumulation, the use of markets, to get feedback from markets, obviously involving the wage labor system, then China looks very capitalist. And in a lot of ways, more capitalist than a lot of parts of the West. If you see capitalism as being ultimately rooted in liberal principles about secure property rights, it's not capitalist at all. And this gets us back to our sort of Anglo-capitalist crypto Jews, because, that's their whole thing. That's the whole thing. And what the Anglos have liked about the Jews in this respect is the fact that the Jews have always been extremely conscious about and are happy about the idea of just randomly having some governments grabbing all their shit and then kicking them out of the country. Like, so the cultural reflexes that come from that, the kind of institutional responses that come to that, the ones that are happy on the right, there's a lot of alternative responses that are deeply problematic to people on the right, like the notion that you kind of weaken the government by making it into a multicultural hellhole. But if we're just looking at the positive right-wing tendencies, is precisely in order to secure these kind of crypto-capitalist, trustless mechanisms that make it impossible to just be expropriated by political power in the country that you're in. Now, China, absolutely, that's a non-starter for them. They don't want any of that stuff, you know? Like capitalism, private property, all exists at the pleasure of the state. Like if the Chinese Communist Party has been very pragmatic since Mao, and you know, to such an extent that it was very easily confusable with being just a straightforward liberal democratic trajectory that it was on. But I now think that's an illusion, because ultimately there are these stopping limits, and it criminalized crypto because it doesn't want that type of capitalist culture to be possible in China.
Sorry.
No, you go.
Just from a liberal point of view, from a Lindsayite point of view, that just reeks of just pure authoritarianism. But there's got to be more nuance in there. There's got to be a cultural content to that disgust reflex from, maybe not disgust reflex, but this dislike or distrust of property of.
Well, it's not that they distrust it in the sense that they love having these businesses. You know, there's a lot of billionaires in China. There's a lot of big private companies in China. There's an incredibly thriving market economy in China.
But there's something above it. It's at the pleasure of the state.
Yeah,
there's something above
it's
that.
At the pleasure of the state. And of course, like, you know, someone like Yarvin would say, well, that's really true in the West too, actually. We're just in denial about it. Like, I'm not aligned with him quite on that. But I'm saying only that, you know, well, I don't know how much we should go down the Yarvinite rabbit hole, but just to say his whole monarchist thing is exactly that. Is to say, look, you know, that the libertarians make this big mistake if they don't understand that everything they own, property, is actually at the pleasure of the regime. It's at the pleasure of power. The economic wealth is downstream of power. Is the Yarvinite position, and that's the principle of the Chinese regime too. So it doesn't mean just for Yarvin, he thinks that private businesses would thrive even more under a formalized monarchical system in the West that, you know, just recognize this principle that there is no private economy that is not downstream of power. You know, China kind of vindicates him. In fact, to such a degree that in some ways it's kind of weird that he's not just a kind of simple apologist for the Chinese regime, because the Chinese regime is very Yarvinite, actually. I mean, it's like it's not that it's not like insane communists want to stamp out all that stuff. It's not that you should use state power to stop that happening. On the contrary, you want as much of it as possible to happen, but it has to happen within the understanding that it's a national resource, like, you know, that private business is being tolerated because this is for the good of the country, it's for the good of the state. It's like as soon as any question arises that these private actors say, like, I'm rich and I'm therefore can, like, you know,
throw my weight around. Elon Musk is, there's never going to be a Elon Musk starting up satellite companies in China, starting up, taking over.
There's no possibility that any business in China is going to engage in open defiance of the state. It's just not, that's not the way the system is configured at all. couldn't happen. And there's been a lot of cases that just demonstrate that. There's been systematic humiliation of Chinese tycoons that have seemed to be forgetting due deference to political authorities and forgetting the fact that they owe everything to the fact that they're being allowed to do this stuff by the regime.
Is the ability for Americans and Anglos more broadly to defy the state, to strike out in their own entrepreneurial identity and then scale it up to be a power player, is that substantially different between the West and China? Or totally. Just how is it different? Maybe that'll show.
Well, because however sort of broken and compromised it is, the West still has, the Anglo-West in particular, has liberal capitalism. Which is, again, it goes back, just again and again to the people E. Michael Jones hates, the Anglo-Protestant, crypto-Jew capitalists. This is the culture of capitalism in the West. And that's all about being able to hide things from the government, protect your wealth from the government. The independence is obviously partial, but it's always Bitcoin. It's hard now to remember that it was extremely a controversial development at one point, and everyone sort of on the left at all said what this is trying to do is disgusting. Because if you own Bitcoin, you're completely beyond the reach of the state, of the government. It's like, it's wealth that has completely escaped any notion of government oversight, government control, public interest, all of this. It's the fulfillment of a certain right liberal dream.
There's a theological aspect to it. Like there's something above, in China, there's something above capital. The celestials, there's the state, there's the mandate of heaven above.
Yes.
In this Protestant Jewish capitalist theology, there's nothing between you and God. There's no limiting principle. And anything that would be limiting is a false god, the government or, these regimes, these cultures.
Yes,
so there's this total upward, infinite scale.
Yes.
But at the same time, that facilitates the erosion of the groundwork, the community bonds, because there's no pressure to be devoted to the state, to have some sort of patriotism.
No, well, I mean, whether patriotism is properly devoted to the state, I think, is a question. I mean, that's definitely what the
state, but the people, your land, your nation, your fatherland, sure. The blood and the soil, the total persistent negative reaction to Nazism, to belonging to a people, that the people have a will or a group identity at all. It's anathema to the Jewish capitalist Protestant, just the framework. Did I go too far there?
No. I'm just trying to hold it all together. Yeah, I think that's totally right. There is a kind of disintegrative, individualistic trend that, for sure, tends to be highly corrosive of social bonds. And the thing is that ethnically, the English were had very high tolerance for this, because they were so low in ethnocentrism and so high trust. They're so genetically disposed to engage with strangers that they don't traditionally need a lot of thick sociality in order to cooperate with each other very effectively.
Yes. Yeah.
But as we've had this kind of demographic transformation and all these other kind of left-driven transformations, that we find ourselves now in a very different situation. That actually people are realizing that they need a lot more thick sociality, because actually a lot of these kind of strangers that you're kind of supposedly cooperatively engaging with are actually profoundly hostile and engaged in a political project aimed actually at your destruction, and at the destruction of, ultimately at the destruction of the trustless regime. At the you know, it's, you simply couldn't have that. Like, you know, China has banned crypto. You know, if we had a government, I'm not saying the Chinese government is leftist in the same way that a Western leftist government is leftist, but if we had the sort of government the left wants us to have, it too could just stamp out all that stuff and would be totally inclined to do it. And it would be inclined to do it for the reasons we've seen, of the fact that it thinks systems of formal but not substantial equality are unjust. You know, they're bourgeois, they are kind of
they concentrate capital,
impact,
yeah,
they lead to inequality. So the leftist tendency is to be completely opposed to this kind of trustless system. And
trustless system,
as people invested in the trustless system think, oh, everything's fine, you know, we've got a trustless system, it doesn't matter who is in the government, then that is totally naive. And once they start saying, well, it does actually matter a lot what the government looks like, and therefore it matters a lot, all the things that lead to certain types of government also matter a lot. The things that lead to the kind of government that would be a disaster for us exactly are, like, going right back to the start, the enemies of all these different factions of the trichotomy.
Yeah.
Weaponized, hostile demographic policy, weaponized government budgetary policy, weaponized counter-religion, all of those things, all the things the left is just systematically and progressively and relentlessly trying to do, are aimed at extirpating the kind of system that would allow this kind of these liberal mechanisms to operate, because those liberal mechanisms are intolerable to them ultimately.
In an ironic way, the more I talk to the neo-reactionaries and all their permutations, and you're one of the OGs, but all these guys who are taking up these ideas and going through, it seems like they are actually the last defenders of liberalism in this really ironic way, even though they spend so much time and ink and blood attacking liberalism. Like, that's liberalism's only hope.
I totally agree with that. Yes. I think that's what, I think in its essence, neoreaction was exactly that. And I think, you know, Yarvin, who's obviously the kind of major figure and, you know, is explicitly and overtly polemically anti-liberal, is actually best described, as you say, as being engaged in a desperate project to protect liberalism. So, yeah.
There, in our conversation about China and capitalism in the Jewish Protestant capitalist ideology, it seems that what we were talking about, this total upward mobility, this nobody above you, it's very individualist, but at the same time, it seems in that trichotomy, like the capitalists and the ethno-nationalists, that's what you see that in the H-1B fight. Like, they're really at odds with each other. And I'm wondering maybe if that what the theonomist or that religious component is the necessary way to get those two people to work together. I wonder if that trichotomy is actually important. I think not just these people stumbled into the same corner, but they actually need to rely on each other.
Yes, no, I think that's very insightful, and I think it's very true. And I think it works. It's like, I mean, I don't want to be blasphemous in this, but I honestly think theological Trinitarianism actually is a very good model of you've seen these there's a kind of meme version of it, is not, is like it's a complicated relation. All the elements of the trichotomy, all three elements, as you've said, they all have not insubstantial conflicts with each other. Your H1B1, that's a great example. But at the same time, ultimately, it really is, you either hang together or you hang separately. Nothing could be more important than that. All of these three factions realize that despite their serious problems with the others, that if this cannot work as a coalitional project, the alternative is really dire. And it's far more dire for all of them than the kind of concessions that they have to make to each other to keep this coalitional thing on the road. And I really have some kind of faith that people will see that. Because even as they're all fighting, when they just for a minute think, well, what would actually happen if the next presidency was a Democrat presidency? They have to realize that would be an utter catastrophe. I mean, what has been learned by the left by their defeat, and what they would, they will double down on. Or if you think you've seen mass immigration, you have not even slightly seen it. And it's obviously going to just realize that in terms of the culture war against Christianity and all its works will be just massively intensified, and its accumulation of resources extracted from the productive capitalist sector in order to fund itself will be, it's learned from Doge. I think people on the left have learned a lot. Like, I don't think many left-wing activists, they've had some vague sense, all this thing that there's money going to NGOs and it's going to permanent bureaucracy and these people are all on the side and that's great. But I don't think they clearly realize, wow, we had something so good going on there, where we take public funds and we use them for political activism. So you've got a split economy. You've got a capitalist side of the economy that produces goods and services for the people, and you've got a counter-capitalist economy that extracts resources for hostile political activism. It doesn't have to produce anything useful. It doesn't have to. All it is for is political warfare, and the asymmetry is absolutely stunning. It's absolutely stunning. Like someone like Elon Musk, who is obviously this boogeyman figure now for them, but all his resources are used for things like getting to Mars, running a social media platform. Okay, that for them probably is intrinsically problematic. Building electric cars, solar power. I mean, it's stuff that is of general social utility, and money extracted from him and given to leftist NGOs is going to be used for things like, open borders activism, judicial activism to basically mean that you can't take violent criminals off the street. It's like there's no symmetry for it at all. It's not like nice public things with a leftist tone are going to be done with that money. It's going to be used for war. And so, for sure, if the MAGA coalition doesn't realize this, compared to that, I don't underplay these internal tensions. Like, they're serious. H1B thing is it's a serious, interesting issue, but the scale of of the thing here is there's no comparison.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's what I keep on thinking when people just have a shit fit on the right or the center right about these nasty ideas or mean tweets or the Groyper stuff that just keeps on. People are just Charlie Kirk gets shot, and now we're trying to purify the right, while the left is celebrating murder and still totally entrenched in power. Like there's no sense of scale. Like we get hung up on these tiny little things, and so I wonder how do you think is the best way to navigate that, or to lower the temperature, or just embrace these conflicts? The Groyper thing is just really seeming to do a lot of damage. But what do you think? Is it more sensational? Is it not really substantive? Or
I mean, the thing about the Groyper thing is, I guess there's a virtual complicated diagram here, because there's the trichotomy, and there's the kind of antagonists of each of the kind of three poles of the trichotomy, and there's also something that is, is not really part of the trichotomy and can't be part of the trichotomy, but you maybe have to negotiate with for each of those poles. Like, let me just lay it out a little bit more. Like, so for instance, here we're talking about the Groypers. So the Groypers, I think, are adjacent to the ethno-nationalist pole of the, or whatever the word of pole is for a triangle. I don't know what that would be, or a vertex. Yeah, the ethno-nationalist vertex of the trichotomy. But it's not really that America First, that the Groypers are a productive part of that vertex. I honestly can't say what I think. I would hope that the attempt would be to try and pull them over the line and make them productive MAGA ethno-nationalists rather than Groypers. But I don't know exactly what I think. I mean, obviously Nick Fuentes sort of proudly proclaims that he didn't vote for Trump. He's not a MAGA guy. He's not a MAGA guy. He's outside that. And both the other vertices have this as well. There's a kind of Christian coalition that's near our sort of helpful MAGA Christian nationalist types that is actually unhelpful. That is basically like Catholic NGOs that are basically dedicated to just open borders, and stuff that is just like it's not that it's simply not part of the helpful thing at all. And again, it would be good if those people could be brought in. And it's not that they're simply necessarily the enemy on the sense that the actual left coalition is an enemy, but they're definitely not really friends. And obviously there's a whole like woke capital cohort, again, just off the kind of techno-capitalist vertex that again is like not on our side at all. That is basically for globalist imperial capitalism and has zero commitment to the actual survival of America ultimately. It's like they are in the fantasy they could just drift off, that they're a global business, that America is just a kind of way station for them. And that's a massive delusion. It's a massive delusion. The notion that all these people are massively deluded, because all of them ultimately are saying that they can survive with their hobby horses independent of a survival of the American ethnos. And that's just not possible. They will just be eaten. The reason they survive is because America allows them I'm not using it in the Chinese communist sense. I'm
Mm-hmm.
using it in the sense that it supports them, it defends them. Ultimately, American soldiers would die to protect them and their property rights,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore, this kind of notion that they're neutral, that they should have no MAGA commitment, like it's not their thing at all, is a deeply deluded psychotic state, actually. That so one whole level of political activity is to try and straighten out these people's minds. Like, I would hope that the Theonomists can straighten out the minds of their crazed ethno-suicidal Christian brothers, and the MAGA ethnats can get the Groypers to actually be kind of have some loyalty and not just this ridiculous kind of neurotic performance outfit. And similarly, that MAGA capitalism can get these insane globalists to realize that actually they are totally dependent on America working. And they can't engage in systematic activity that is working in a contrary direction to that.
Did you ever suppose, when you were first writing, maybe in the time of your essay, blog post, Dark Enlightenment, that these ideas on the neo-reactionary side would actually gain political traction? And do you see that in the translation to becoming more popular, that they're losing their core insights, or are those core insights becoming realized?
Well, on the second point, I think the conversation we've been having is the key to the relevance of this material. Like, I think a lot of the, like, going back to this thing about anarchists being an ultra-liberal, ultimately an ultra-liberal survivalist ideology, which I think it was. And, it was thinking in terms of like massive geopolitical fragmentation and these kind of city-state
apocalypse
things. And all of it was basically on the other side of some total state of collapse. And maybe there will be a total collapse, and maybe there'll be another side of the collapse. I mean, I don't know. But that doesn't seem to me relevant, particularly now. I mean, that's just like interesting science fiction. So insofar as it is actually useful to anybody, it's because of the stuff we've been talking about. It's about saying that there are these three irreducible currents to the right that need to find a way to cooperate, because they're not all of them dream that they can extirpate the others and just become like the thing. You know what I mean? All of those three think they could do it on their own. You could just have a theocratic America, or you could have just a kind of unfettered capitalist America, or you could have a kind of uncompromised ethno-nationalist America. None of that is possible. It's like, again, just to repeat, it's like we hang together or we hang separately.
Yeah. I mean, even conceptually, they don't work without each other.
I think ultimately that's right.
And I think that's the core of the conversation we're having, is to lay out their differences and then to argue for their dependence, like really on a very deep level. They're very independent. And the ethnic biological component is manifest in the religion and in the capitalism. The capitalism's manifested in both of those other they're all tied together. And I'm wondering what the role of religion is. The work of Jonathan Pageau, I don't know if you know him, Jordan Peterson, certainly, of resurrecting, well, not necessarily resurrecting Christ or the Bible, but giving people modern inroads to the meaning of these structures and allowing them to participate creatively and hyper dogmatically with these ideas and these symbols, these stories, these narratives. I'm wondering if you have any particular loyalty to the Christian story and its role in the West, and how you would translate it to make it relevant in the here and now, or if you see it being translated.
No, I totally think it's relevant. I mean, as I say, my mantra, my self-disciplining mantra, the Anglo-Protestant Whig tradition. So that's got the trichotomy in it. You know, Anglo is ethnic, Protestant is religious, Whig is liberal capitalist. So, you know, I see that as integral, and I see it as a problem. If you allow those things to just become disconnected, you're gonna lose. It's just they have to hold together. So
they all go into incredible extreme. Whigs turns into woke, Protestants turn into
woke.
Woke, yeah, and then the Anglos turn into woke,
and Anglos turn into woke. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, but tied together, I think that's who we are. You know, it's like it's the, you know, what is all this for? It's for that. And so obviously part of that is the religious current, and I think it has to be taken, you know, deeply. I think it's to understate, to say respectfully. I mean, that just sounds. I would want to go a step beyond respectfully, but I can't, in all honesty, say in any orthodox way devotedly. You know what I mean? I think it would be deceptive if I was going to say I am a Christian in any way that would be generally recognized. But what I definitely am is someone who belongs to the Anglo-Protestant Whig tradition, and that I think there's no identity outside that is coherent or is not just performative and unsustainable and ultimately self-destructive. And I think that I have great faith in that tradition. I mean, you know, even just like on the religious current, like I think it's completely not exhausted. I think it is actually a vehicle of divine power. However, that, you know, I would probably not understand that as specifically as, you know, some of my Christian friends would want me to understand it. But I don't mean it unseriously. You know, I think there is a providential current to history that is more basic and more true than secular history itself. And that
you're not just talking about like the arc of history bends towards justice or purely
obviously, you know,
Whiggish.
This is when we say Protestantism, when all these elements break apart and they become woke. And so that's the woke version. That's because I mean, I don't know what justice means. I mean, maybe there's a salvageable notion of it, but in its kind of colloquial sense, that's just woke Christianity, that you believe in nothing except the kind of communistic teleology that you infer to Christianity. So that's obviously not what I mean. I mean that well, there's different ways of doing this. I mean, the way I normally do it, and in talking to people, and maybe this is the main way I think about it, is the fact that the core liberal thought is the invisible hands, which was originally entirely a Christian Protestant, actually, notion. And it's the notion that ultimately social processes are coordinated by something greater than anything understood by the agents involved in those social processes. And I think this is the liberal thought, and it's also the Darwinian thought. I think evolutionary biology is deeply Protestant in this way, that actually all the creatures of the earth all have their own specific, more or less confused purposes, but there is a giant narrative that is beyond any of those purposes and not encompassed by those purposes, and ultimately is the ultimate frame of those purposes. So, I don't think that the tendency of the Anglo culture into Darwinism and what follows from it is actually a departure from our religious tradition, properly understood. I think it's rather that narrowly understood, narrowly understood on both sides, it might look like that. But this, this is again one of these like trichotomy discussion points. You know what I mean? It seems to me like hardcore Darwinists and sola scriptura Protestants should have a difficult but mutually respectful conversation, and I think that conversation should be based on an ultimate faith that the invisible hands have this. It's like they shouldn't be trying to exterminate each other. This goes for all of these things. Like, there's this zone. The trichotomy is the zone of respectful conversation, however intense it might be, and the notion of extermination should not be a realistic prospect by any of those poles.
Absolutely. Anybody who's trying to participate in cancellation in that trichotomy is either an enemy or naive, and a neophyte that doesn't really understand the complexities and the depth of these conversations that have been occurring for at least 10 years, 20 years.
Yes, it is. And I think I think we have several threads on the go simultaneously here. So there's definitely a continuity of the whole, what is the whole theonomist trend about, that I would definitely pursue further. But at the risk of being repetitive, I think that these recent conniptions of, like, as you say, the H1B thing is a very good one. And then I think there's probably many others, actually. They're breaking out all over the place.
There's a new one every week.
Yes. And I think it should surely not be too hard for people to understand that you can have a really intense but mutually respectful argument on all of these points within the broad context that this coalition has to survive. I mean, that should just be axiomatic. It's but anyone. This is why I'm saying, there are people outside it, who might seem adjacent, but I don't think they're they're not our people, and they're not our people unless they can subscribe to this axiom that the coalition has to survive. And if you're some groiper saying, I'd rather blow the whole thing up because it's not meeting my particular agenda point on this, or whatever it is, an ethnat saying, blow it up if we don't get everything we want on H1B visa. Do not blow it up. If you blow it up, you are so screwed that you can't, you should be trying to imagine how screwed you are, because it is really screwed. So, it might not be that you get everything you want on these particular points. And that's not to say they're not really important. I mean, I totally sympathize. In fact, I actually have deep sympathies with both sides of this H1B debate. I mean, I can totally see why both sides of that argument are very worked up about it. I can see the importance of them. I can see why it's a critical issue. I can see that they have very serious arguments about it. And we're going to end up with something on this spectrum that is going to be satisfying to one to the degree it's unsatisfying to the other. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way it is. I mean, sorry. I mean, it's like, those two camps are not going to find a solution to this issue that makes them both extremely cheerful. And they have to suck that up. It's completely reasonable to try to move that spectrum as much in their direction as possible. And I would be happy to just nod along to anything on that spectrum. You know what I mean? If it's bring a load of high-skilled people in, as long as they're kind of actually qualified and, you know what I mean, they're high-quality immigration, or, cut the thing back to the bare bones. We should be looking to
people
give
inside,
to Americans. Both of those positions I have sympathy with, and I personally am going to just accept. I'm not going to start sounding off about being betrayed wherever the thing ends up on that, and I don't think anyone should.
Well, what would satisfy the preconditions of feeling betrayed?
What would satisfy
in any topic within this space? What would
it would be someone trying to blow up this coalition. That should be the only realistic sense of betrayal. Betrayal is if you're going to do something that's going to blow up the coalition and put the Democrats back in power in the next election. That's betrayal. Anything that is consistent with that coalition holding together should be acceptable on one level, even if it's suboptimal to people. And I think if it isn't, they've lost all perspective, as we were saying earlier.
I think this conversation is probably one of the most important in my series on the right-wing thought, because entering into it, I was going from a not left perspective. I'm like, well, what are the alternatives to leftism? What's the I've spent so much time doing this anti-woke thing. What are the alternatives? Stumble into Yarvin. I stumble into the right, and the right's just all these. And I realized there's a lot of different. This is not one thing. This is not one thing. And as I've gone through and explored it, it's a coalition. It's a counterinsurgency. There are all these different aspects, and watching the people from the center or from liberal just not understanding that the not left are these different things. And so your articulation of these three in the depth that we've covered today really brings me to the next level. It's like, okay, well, how do these people talk together? Where are the statesmen among these people? They need to be, now that we've articulated them, that's just the ground, the territories is much more open in my mind. And the necessity for a statesman-like group of people or person to facilitate the discussion between them and to protect that discussion from various different bad actors or, destroyers or dissidents against the dissidents. It's much more articulated in my mind.
Good. Yes, thank you. I mean, I think there's just this game theoretic thing that there's this, it's on the table that someone could say, if I don't get everything I want, I'm going to blow it all up. And that,
Petulant.
most toxic thing. All the toxicity is coming from that.
Mm-hmm. And the left can afford that. We can't.
There should be just massive intolerance of that. If someone is playing that game, it's just like, okay, this conversation is over until you
not naming any names here, but you know who you are. Mr. Land, it's midnight for you. I need another cup of coffee. I would like to wrap up this conversation, but I want to have more conversations if we have time in the future. This has been just an excellent way to wake up for me. And hopefully it's been a nice way to put you to bed, if you do go to bed.
Right. Yeah, we're almost at a point where a sane person would have woken up for you.
Yeah. Is there anything on the forefront of your production mill that you would point people to about your work, where it is?
I think nothing substantial is going to hit anytime soon. Frankly, this kind of conversation, in terms of like practical productivity, is where I'm at right now. So, yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think it's been great.
Final question then. I noticed you and Yarvin came back on the scene almost at the same time. Like you did a bunch of work back in the day, and then you kind of disappeared off the map. And then you're both really active on Twitter, on social. What prompted you to get back into the fray? What elicited your excitation for expression on social media?
Well, I mean, now let me think. This is a zone where it's very possible to just create these fake retro narratives, So, I mean, my immediate temptation is to say Elon buying Twitter was the key thing. And I mean, if someone's going through my timeline, they'll say, oh, maybe that's not right. Like you disappeared for months then, or whatever it is. So that might be true, but that's my mental image of it. And it's just, I mean, it's not a great thing, but I personally, that whole Twitter format where you have a thought, you stick it up, and it's done, is something that's like very convenient at the very least. I mean, it's something I resonate with. So obviously Yarvin's not quite like that because he's doing much more substantial, like Substack writings at the same time.
But it just seems like you're engaged now with the community that you were a part of forming, or at least articulating.
Yes, maybe that's right. It's probably complicated. I feel that I have a lot of different sort of lines of attraction to this. So this is the conversation we've just had is one of them. I think we're at this crucial phase change in history. It's just, it can't be overestimated how amazing this time is as something really important. And so it's difficult not to feel some responsibility for engagement in that. But then there's lots of more sort of esoteric things that you can get feedback from in social media and
Well, I'm glad to have you around, and thank you so much for your evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your crack of dawn morning. And
I was ready.
I'd love to do this again. I mean, this is normally I only have accessible to this shitty laptop that cannot do video. So for this format, it's like I just have these occasional time windows at the moment that I can do this sort of thing. So it's complicated, but I'm very, very glad that we've had this opportunity.
Same.
Thank you.
Let me end the recording.